Imagine standing in a brand new $7 billion terminal, surrounded by sleek glass, modern German engineering, and rows of pristine check-in counters. You would expect the atmosphere to be buzzing with the efficiency of a global transit hub. But as you walk through Berlin-Brandenburg Airport, something feels off. There is a strange silence in corridors meant for millions. And if you look closely at the balance sheets tucked away in the administrative offices, you will find a financial catastrophe that refuses to end. 5 years after finally opening its doors to the public, an airport that was supposed to be the jewel of German infrastructure is still bleeding millions of euros every single month. It is a mega project so broken that even its completion couldn't save it. Today we are going deep into the structural and financial ruins of BER to understand how a $5 billion project doubled in cost, took 14 years to build, and is now trapped in a cycle of debt that literally nobody knows how to stop. To understand why Berlin's airport is currently a financial black hole, we have to go back to the beginning of the nightmare. This wasn't just supposed to be an airport. It was supposed to be a symbol of a reunified Germany. After the fall of the wall, Berlin had 3 small, aging airports: Tegel, Tempelhof, and Schönefeld. The plan was simple and ambitious: consolidate everything into one world-class hub that would rival London, Paris, or Dubai. They broke ground in 2006 with a budget of roughly €2 billion and an opening date set for 2011. But as soon as the first shovels hit the dirt, the efficiency Germany is famous for started to evaporate. The first major sign that this project was heading for disaster came just weeks before the grand opening in June 2012. The invitations were sent, the champagne was on ice, and Lufthansa had even scheduled a special flight for the occasion. Then, 25 days before the first plane was supposed to land, the whole thing was called off. Why? Because the fire safety system was a complete mess. It wasn't just a small glitch. The system was so complex and so poorly designed that it was physically impossible for it to work. They had built miles of ventilation ducts that were supposed to pull smoke downward instead of upward, defying the laws of physics. When inspectors tested it, the ducts simply collapsed under the pressure. This delay didn't just last a few months. It lasted 8 years, and this is where the money started to bleed at an uncontrollable rate. When you have a massive airport sitting finished but unused, you can't just turn off the lights and go home. You have to maintain it. For nearly a decade, Berlin-Brandenburg was a ghost airport. Every single day, empty trains were run to the basement station to keep the tracks from rusting. Every single day, thousands of light bulbs were kept on to prevent the electronics from failing. Every single month, a small army of security guards and maintenance staff had to be paid to patrol a terminal where not a single passenger walked. This maintenance of a ghost cost the taxpayers millions every week, all while the interest on the construction loans continued to pile up. But wait, it gets even more absurd. Because the airport sat unused for so long, the technology inside became obsolete before it was ever used. By the time they were ready to fix the fire system, the flight information screens had reached the end of their natural lifespan and had to be replaced. The baggage handling software was outdated. Even the check-in desks were starting to look like relics from a previous era. It was a cycle of decay and replacement that added billions to the final bill. By the time the airport finally opened in late 2020, the cost had skyrocketed from 2 billion to over 7 billion euros. Now, you might think that once the airport opened and passengers started paying fees, the bleeding would stop. In most business models, that's how it works. You build the factory, you start the production, and you pay off the debt. But BER is not a normal business. It is a legacy of failure that was born at the worst possible time. It opened right in the middle of a global crisis that saw air travel collapse. Just as Berlin finally had its big, shiny airport, the world stopped flying. The revenue that was supposed to save the project simply didn't exist. Today, 5 years after that underwhelming opening day, the financial situation is actually worse than many people realize. The airport is saddled with massive debt, and the interest payments alone are enough to swallow any operating profit the airport manages to scrape together. It is a debt trap. The state of Berlin and the surrounding state of Brandenburg have to keep injecting hundreds of millions of euros in emergency subsidies just to keep the lights on. It's a situation where the airport isn't just failing to make money, it is actively consuming the public budget meant for schools, roads, and hospitals. One of the biggest issues is the structural design flaws that passengers deal with every day. Despite the massive budget, the airport feels cramped in places it should be spacious. The security checkpoints are notorious for long wait times because the footprint of the building was finalized back in the early 2000s, before modern security requirements became so intensive. They built yesterday's airport tomorrow, and now they are stuck with it. The flow of people through the terminal is awkward, leading to bottlenecks that frustrate travelers and reduce the time they spend in the retail areas, the very places the airport needs people to spend money. Let's talk about the nobody stops it part of the story. Why hasn't anyone pulled the plug or reorganized the management in a way that works? The answer lies in the complex web of German politics. The airport is owned by the states of Berlin and Brandenburg and the federal government. This means every single decision is a political battle. Nobody wants to be the politician who admits that the $7 billion project is a total loss. Instead, they choose to extend and pretend. They keep approving small bailouts, hoping that eventually the growth in air travel will magically fix the hole in the budget. But math doesn't work on hope. The retail situation at the airport is another tragedy. When the airport was being designed, they overpromised the amount of luxury shopping and dining that would be available. But because of the delays and the reputation of the project, many high-end brands stayed away. Large sections of the terminal feel like a generic shopping mall, rather than a premium international gateway. This means the per-passenger revenue is much lower than at airports like Munich or Frankfurt. Without that high-margin retail income, the airport remains dependent on aircraft landing fees, which are locked in a very competitive market. There is also the ghost of Tegel Airport. For decades, Berliners loved Tegel. It was old and cramped, but you could get from the taxi to your gate in 5 minutes. When Tegel was finally forced to close to make way for BER, there was a huge outcry. Tegel was efficient in its own chaotic way. BER, by contrast, feels like a cold, bureaucratic machine that doesn't actually work very well. This cultural resentment means that even the local population isn't rooting for the new airport's success. It's hard to build a profitable business when your primary customer base misses your predecessor. If we look at the engineering side, the bleeding isn't just financial, it's physical. The airport was built on a site with complex soil conditions, and the delays meant that some of the underground infrastructure sat in water for years. There are ongoing maintenance issues with the underground railway station and the tunnels that require constant, expensive repairs. It is a forever project. There will never be a day when BER is simply finished. It is a living ruin that requires constant life support. The management turnover at the airport has been legendary. Since the project started, there have been multiple CEOs, each promising to be the one to finally fix the mess. Some were seasoned aviation experts, some were political lobbyists, and some were construction specialists. None of them could overcome the gravity of the project's failures. With every change in leadership, a new strategy was implemented, which often meant tearing up the plans of the previous person. This lack of continuity added hundreds of millions in consulting fees and wasted work to the total cost. Let's dive into the sunk cost fallacy that is keeping this project alive. In economics, a sunk cost is money you've already spent and can't get back. The logical thing to do is to ignore it and make decisions based on the future. But when you've spent $7 billion of taxpayer money, you can't just walk away. The politicians feel they have to keep spending to prove that the original investment wasn't a mistake. It is a textbook case of digging the hole deeper to try and get out of it. The result is a project that is too big to fail, but too broken to succeed. The noise complaints from local residents have also added to the financial burden. Because the airport took so long to open, the residential areas around it grew. By the time the planes started taking off, thousands of people were living under the flight paths. The airport has been hit with massive legal requirements for noise insulation. They have had to pay for soundproof windows and ventilation systems for thousands of homes, a bill that has run into the hundreds of millions. This was a cost that was barely factored into the original €2 billion budget. Even the baggage system, which was supposed to be a marvel of automation, has been plagued by issues. Because the system was installed years before it was used, the mechanical parts seized up and the software became obsolete. There were periods during the testing phase where bags were simply disappearing into the vast labyrinth of conveyor belts beneath the terminal. While most of these bugs have been worked out, the cost of maintaining such an over-engineered and aging system is much higher than a modern, simplified setup would be. Is there any hope? Some analysts argue that if Berlin continues to grow as a tech hub and a cultural capital, The airport will eventually reach its capacity of 40 million passengers a year. At that volume, the airport might finally become operationally profitable. But even then, it will never pay back the 7 billion euros it cost to build. From a pure accounting perspective, the money is gone. It has been vaporized by delays, but to minimize the annual loss. This is the reality for failing megaprojects in the 21st century. We build things so large and so complex that the human systems meant to manage them simply break down. Berlin-Brandenburg isn't just an airport. It is a monument to the limits of planning. It shows us that when a project loses its momentum, it becomes a parasite on the very society it was meant to serve. The airport is open. Yes, you can buy a ticket, you can board a plane, and you can fly to New York or Tokyo. But every time you do, you are participating in a financial tragedy that the citizens of Berlin will be paying for generations. The most frustrating part for many observers is that there is no villain in this story. There was no single moment of corruption or a single person who crashed the project. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. It was a series of small, bad decisions made by committees of people who were more worried about their political careers than the structural integrity of the fire vents. It was a failure of the system rather than the individual. And that is why it is so hard to stop. You can't fire a system. You can only keep subsidizing it and hope for the best. When you walk through the arrivals hall today, you see a ceiling known as the Magic Carpet. It's a beautiful red art installation made of woven metal. It was designed to give the airport a sense of warmth and identity. But if you talk to the maintenance workers, they will tell you it's a nightmare to clean and a challenge for the fire sensors. It is a perfect metaphor for the entire airport. Something that looks great in a PR brochure but is fundamentally impractical and expensive in the real world. The airport also suffers from a lack of hub status. While it was built to be a major transit point, Germany's national carrier, Lufthansa, has kept its primary hubs in Frankfurt and Munich. Without a major airline using BER as a transfer point for thousands of daily flights, the airport is mostly a point-to-point destination. This limits its growth potential and makes it harder to attract the kind of long-haul flights that bring in the big revenue. It's an international airport that is struggling to act like one. 5 years in, the "nobody stops it" mantra continues. The bailouts are now a regular part of the budget cycle. The news reports about the airport's losses have become background noise for the people of Berlin. It has become a normalized failure. This is perhaps the most dangerous stage of a mega project. When people stop being angry about the waste, the incentive to fix the underlying problems disappears. The airport just becomes another government department that consumes money without question. As travelers, we see the glass and the gates. We see the duty-free shops and the boarding passes. But the real story of Berlin-Brandenburg is written in the interest rates, the lawsuits, and the physics of smoke extraction. It is a story of how a $5 billion error can become a permanent part of a city's landscape. It is a reminder that in the world of megaprojects, finishing is not the same as succeeding. An airport can be open and still be a failure. The lesson of BER for the rest of the world is simple. Complexity kills. When you try to build something that is too interconnected and too politically sensitive, you create a monster that cannot be controlled. Future architects and planners will look at the ruins of the BER budget as a warning. They will study the collapsed ventilation ducts and the obsolete flight screens as artifacts of a project that forgot its primary purpose, to move people from point A to point B efficiently. As we look toward the future of aviation, with electric planes and sustainable fuels on the horizon, BER remains stuck in the past. It is a 20th century idea that struggled into the 21st century and is now gasping for air. It will stay open, of course. The planes will keep landing, and the passengers will keep complaining about the long walks to the gates, but the bleeding will continue. Every time a plane touches down on those $7 billion runways, it is a reminder of the price we pay when ambition outruns reality. The airport is a living case study in the anatomy of a failing megaproject. It has all the symptoms: cost overruns, massive delays, technical obsolescence, and political paralysis. It is a ghost of a project that was once meant to change the world, now relegated to just trying to stay solvent for one more month. It is a story with no clear ending, only a series of expensive sequels. Nobody stops it because nobody knows how. And so the money keeps flowing, the lights stay on, and the silent terminal waits for a success that may never come. In the end, Berlin-Brandenburg Airport is a testament to the fact that you can build a masterpiece of engineering and still fail at the most basic level of business. It is a warning to every city and every nation that thinks they can build their way to prestige without a rock-solid foundation of planning and accountability. The $7 billion price tag is just the entry fee. The real cost is the decade of progress that was lost while the airport sat in the dark. So, the next time you fly through Berlin, take a moment to look at the magic carpet ceiling. Think about the billions of euros that passed through these halls before a single suitcase ever did. Think about the empty trains and the thousands of light bulbs that burned in an empty building for 8 long years. And remember that in the world of mega projects, the biggest disasters aren't the ones that fall down. They're the ones that stay standing and never stop costing you money. The bleeding of Berlin-Brandenburg is the silent pulse of a failing giant, a terminal case of ambition gone wrong. We will keep watching this project, not because we expect it to suddenly become a success, but because it is a vital lesson in what happens when we lose control of our own creations. The 5-year anniversary of its opening is not a celebration, but a milestone in a long, expensive journey. As long as the planes are flying, the stories will keep emerging from those glass walls. Stories of high-stakes gambling with public funds, and the relentless gravity of a bad start. BER is here to stay, and the world will be paying attention for a long time to come. It's an airport, it's a museum of mistakes, and it's a financial hole that goes all the way to the core of German politics. And the most incredible part? It's still happening right now, every single day, as the sun rises over the Brandenburg terminal and a new day of losses begins. The engines are humming, the gates are open, and the $7 billion giant continues its slow, steady bleed into the future. That is the reality of the Berlin airport, a mega project that won't die, won't thrive, and most definitely won't stop.